The Ghosts of St. Havens by Kyle Byram. The crumbling structure of St. Havens Children's Hospital stood against the autumn sky like a forgotten gravestone, its skeletal remains a grim reminder of darker days. Built in the 1940s as a haven for terminally ill children, the hospital's reputation had been tarnished by whispers of negligence and tragedy. Now, decades later, its broken windows stared out at the world like hollow eyes, while ivy crept up its walls like grasping fingers, nature slowly reclaiming what man had abandoned. The setting sun painted the building's facade in shades of blood red, casting long shadows across the overgrown parking lot where four teenagers gathered, each wrestling with their own doubts about what they were about to do. Dead leaves skittered across the cracked pavement, carried by a wind that seemed to whisper warnings. Maya Chin adjusted her camera settings for the 20th time, trying to ignore the knot in her stomach. The weight of her brother's photo in her back pocket felt heavier than usual. 2 years had passed since leukemia took Michael, but some days the loss felt as fresh as yesterday. She joined this ghost hunting expedition hoping to find something. Proof that death was in the end, maybe. Or just a way to feel close to Michael again. Her fingers traced the edge of her camera, remembering how she documented every moment of Michael's final days, as if capturing them on film could somehow keep him alive. "Hey, Earth to Maya," Derrick called out, his trademark grin plastered across his face as he adjusted his flashlight. "You still with us, or are you already seeing ghosts?" Maya forced a smile, knowing Derrick used humor to mask his own fears. She'd known him since middle school, back when he was a scared kid who transferred in after months of bullying at his old school. She'd watched him transform himself into the daredevil everyone knew today, but she could still see traces of that frightened boy in moments like these, when his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm fine," she said, checking her battery level one last time. "Just want to make sure we get everything on camera. This could be our channel's biggest video yet. If we survive," Sam muttered, tugging at the straps of his backpack. His father's latest episode had landed him back in the psychiatric ward just last week, and Sam's usual skepticism seemed more pronounced than ever. "The floor could collapse, or we could get tetanus, or we could actually see a ghost," Jade interrupted, her black painted nails picking at the sleeve of her oversized hoodie. "Wouldn't that be worse than tetanus, Mr. Science?" She'd been the last to join their little group, reluctantly drawn into their orbit after a group project in chemistry class. Maya sometimes caught glimpses of loneliness beneath Jade's carefully constructed wall of sarcasm, like now, when she hung slightly back from the others, as if expecting to be excluded at any moment. "Ghosts aren't real," Sam insisted, but his voice wavered. He pulled out his phone, presumably to check the structural integrity of abandoned buildings for the 100th time. "There's always a logical explanation. Always. Tell that to my subscribers," Derrick said, already filming with his phone. "What's up, ghost hunters? We're here at the infamous St. Havens Children's Hospital, where dozens of kids allegedly died under mysterious circumstances. Tonight, we're going to find out what really happened here." Maya watched through her viewfinder as Derrick performed for the camera, his confident persona slipping into place like a well-worn mask. But she noticed how his hand shook slightly as he gestured toward the building, how his voice caught almost imperceptibly when he mentioned the dead children. According to local legend, Derrick continued, pacing before the rusty gates, one patient in particular never left. Tommy Whitman, age 8, died here in 1943. But his body was never claimed, and some say his spirit still wanders these halls, looking for someone to play with. A sudden gust of wind swept through the parking lot, carrying with it the distant sound of children's laughter. All four teens froze, exchanging uncertain glances. "That was just the wind," Sam said quickly, but he stepped closer to the group. "Right," Jade drawled, though she'd gone pale beneath her dark makeup. "Because wind totally sounds like giggling children." "We don't have to do this," Maya said softly, noticing how Derrick's confident smile had slipped. "We could find another place to film, somewhere less haunted?" Derrick's smile returned, but it looked forced. "No way! This is our chance to make it big. Besides, I already announced it on social media. We back out now, we'll look like cowards." Maya wanted to tell him that courage sometimes meant walking away, that he didn't have to prove himself anymore. But she knew he wouldn't listen. None of them would. They each had their own reasons for being here, their own ghosts to confront. The hospital's front doors groaned open like a mouth desperate to swallow them whole. The sound echoed through the empty halls, stirring up decades of dust and memories. Their flashlight beams cut through the darkness, revealing peeling walls where faded murals of cartoon animals grinned with malevolent cheer. "Temperature's already dropping," Sam announced, holding up a digital thermometer he'd brought along with his other ghost hunting equipment. Maya knew he'd spent hours researching paranormal investigation techniques, though he claimed it was just to debunk them. "It's 10 degrees cooler in here than outside. Because it's a big, empty building with no heating," Jade said, but she wrapped her arms around herself as they ventured deeper into the darkness. The beam of Maya's flashlight revealed an abandoned nurse's station, its counter littered with moldy papers and broken equipment. A clipboard hung crookedly on the wall, patient names still visible through the grime. She zoomed in with her camera, capturing the eerie details. "Check this out," she called to the others, focusing on one particular name. "Tommy Whitman, room 217. "Don't start," Sam warned, but he came over to look anyway. "That doesn't prove anything except that he was actually a patient here, which we already knew." A soft thud echoed from somewhere down the dark corridor, followed by the distinct sound of something rolling across the floor. All 4 teens turned their lights in that direction, revealing a small red ball bouncing slowly toward them. "Okay, that's not creepy at all," Jade muttered, backing away. "It's just gravity," Sam insisted, though his voice shook. "The floor must be uneven." Derrick stepped forward, his camera trained on the ball. "If there's anyone here who wants to communicate with us, give us a sign." The ball stopped rolling. Then, slowly, it began to roll back the way it had come. "Holy shit," Derrick whispered, his forced bravado finally cracking. "Did you guys see that?" "I got it on camera," Maya confirmed, her hands trembling as she zoomed in on the ball's retreat. "All of it." They followed the ball's path down the corridor, their footsteps echoing in the heavy silence. The air grew colder with each step, their breath visible in white clouds. The ball led them to a set of double doors marked children's ward in faded letters. "We should go back," Sam said, his scientific certainty crumbling in the face of the inexplicable. This can't be. "We can't leave now," Derrick insisted, though he looked as scared as any of them. "This is exactly what we came for." The doors creaked open at their approach, revealing a long room filled with small beds. Most were overturned, their mattresses rotted with age and exposure. But one bed at the far end stood perfectly made, its white sheets gleaming impossibly clean in the beam of their flashlights. On the pillow lay a teddy bear, its fur worn thin by years of loving embrace. Maya stepped closer, drawn by an inexplicable familiarity. The bear reminded her of the one Michael had clutched during his chemotherapy sessions, his own constant companion through the worst days of his illness. Her camera captured every detail as she reached out to touch it. The moment her fingers brushed the worn fur, a child's laughter echoed through the room, not scary or threatening, but filled with simple joy. The sound hit Sam like a physical blow. He stumbled back, his face draining of color as a memory surfaced, sitting by his father's bedside, listening to him describe the voices only he could hear. "Tell me you heard that," he whispered. "The final entry is strange," Sam read aloud. "It says Tommy's condition was improving, but then he just disappeared. They found his room empty one morning, the bed made, his bear left behind. There was no record of him being discharged or dying. I didn't disappear," Tommy said, making them all jump. His form had grown more solid, more present. "I died waiting for them to come back. But nobody claimed my body. Nobody remembered me. So I stayed." The air grew heavy with sorrow, and the building seemed to groan around them. Other spirits began to appear, children of different eras, all bearing the marks of their final illnesses. They surrounded the teens, reaching out with transparent hands. "Play with us," they whispered in unison. "Stay with us." The doors slammed shut, and the windows rattled in their frames. The other spirits grew more insistent, their ethereal forms pressing closer, their voices rising to a desperate chorus. "Tommy," Maya said, fighting back tears as she thought of Michael, "we can't stay. But that doesn't mean you have to be alone anymore. She pulled out her brother's photo, showing it to the ghost boy. "This was my brother, Michael. He died in a hospital too. I know how scary and lonely it must have been for you." Tommy drifted closer, studying the photo with transparent eyes. "Did he have someone with him? At the end?" "Yes," Maya whispered. "He wasn't alone. And you don't have to be either, but you need to let go. All of you do." Jade stepped forward, her own walls crumbling. "Being alone doesn't make you strong, Tommy. I learned that the hard way. Sometimes letting go is the bravest thing you can do." Sam, his skepticism finally shattered, added his own insight: "Death isn't the end of being remembered. My dad. He's still alive, but sometimes he's not really there. I've learned that loving someone means keeping them in your heart, even when they're gone." Derrick, the last to speak, finally let his mask fall completely. "I've spent years pretending to be fearless, but the truth is, being afraid is part of being alive. And you don't have to be afraid anymore, Tommy." The other spirits began to fade, their desperate need for connection easing as they listened to the teen's words. But Tommy remained, his form flickering between boy and ghost. "If I let go," he asked, "will you remember me?" "Yes," they promised in unison. Maya had an idea. She set up her camera on a tripod and gathered everyone around Tommy's bed. The ghost boy sat in the middle, his teddy bear in his arms, while the teens surrounded him. For one perfect moment, as the camera's timer counted down, they were all there together, the living and the dead, the lonely and the healing, all finding connection in their shared understanding of loss. The photo, when Maya checked it later, showed only the 4 teens and an empty space where Tommy had been. But there was something else captured in that image, a sense of peace, of closure, of bridges built between worlds. As dawn broke over St. Havens, the teens gathered Tommy's remaining possessions, his teddy bear, the ball that had led them to him, and the photo they had taken together. They buried them beneath an old oak tree in the hospital grounds, marking the spot with a simple wooden cross bearing his name. "Goodbye, Tommy," Maya whispered as they finished. "You won't be forgotten." A warm breeze rustled the leaves above them, carrying the sound of a child's laughter, not sad or lonely now, but full of joy. And in that moment, each teen felt something shift inside them, as if a wound they hadn't known they carried had finally begun to heal. They kept their promise. Every year on the anniversary of that night, they returned to the oak tree, bringing toys and flowers for Tommy. They never posted their footage online or tried to prove what they had experienced. Some things, they had learned, were too precious for proof. Sam went on to study parapsychology, combining his scientific mind with his new understanding of things that couldn't be measured. Jade learned to lower her defensive walls, eventually becoming a counselor for lonely kids. Derrick found that true courage lay in vulnerability, not bravado, and began sharing his own story of bullying and healing. And Maya? She kept filming documentaries, but now she focused on stories of connection and healing, of bridges built between lost souls. Sometimes, late at night while editing footage, she would catch glimpses of orbs floating through her frames, small reminders that love, like energy, never truly dies. It just changes form. The ghost of St. Havens had finally found peace, but his story lived on in the hearts of 4 teens who had learned that the deepest hauntings aren't always about fear, sometimes they're about finding the courage to let go, the strength to remember, and the wisdom to know that no one is ever truly alone. The discovery of Tommy's presence had shaken them all, but it wasn't the only supernatural encounter they would face that night. As they moved deeper into the hospital's labyrinth and corridors, each teen found themselves confronting manifestations of their own fears and unresolved traumas. Maya's camera continued to malfunction, its screen flickering between the present and what seemed like scenes from the hospital's past. Through her viewfinder, she caught glimpses of nurses rushing through corridors with gurneys, worried parents pacing waiting rooms, and children playing despite their illnesses. But it was the sight of a small boy receiving chemotherapy that made her hands shake so badly she nearly dropped the camera. "Michael?" she whispered, recognizing her brother's face among the spectral images. Jade noticed Maya's distress and moved closer, surprising herself with the instinct to comfort someone else. "Hey, what do you see? It's like the walls are remembering," Maya managed, showing Jade the camera screen. All the pain, all the hope, all the loss. It's still here. Sam's EMF meter suddenly spiked again, its display scrambling with impossible readings. The temperature around them plummeted so rapidly their breath crystallized in the air. "This defies all logical explanation," he muttered, but his voice held more wonder than skepticism now. The energy readings are off the charts. From somewhere deeper in the building came the sound of children singing, a haunting lullaby that seemed to echo from every direction at once. The melody was familiar to Derrick, and his usual confident facade cracked completely as he recognized it. "That's the song my mom used to sing," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Before she left. He hadn't told any of them about his mother's abandonment before, how she'd walked out one day and never returned, leaving him to build walls of false bravado to protect himself from further hurt. The singing grew louder, and ghostly figures began to materialize around them, children of different eras, all bearing the marks of their final illnesses. Some played with spectral toys, others sat in wheelchairs that moved on their own, and a few simply stood watching the teens with hollow eyes. They're all connected, Sam realized, his scientific mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The hospital. It's like a focal point for their energy. Their emotions, their memories. Their loneliness, Jade added softly, understanding flooding her features. She'd spent years pushing people away, convinced that isolation was safer than risking rejection. But watching these lost souls searching for connection made her own walls seem suddenly foolish. Tommy reappeared among the other spirits, but now he seemed different, more substantial, more present. "They stayed too," he explained, gesturing to the other ghosts. "Some because they were afraid to leave, others because they had nowhere else to go. But mostly because they didn't want to be forgotten." A young girl in a 1950s hospital gown stepped forward, her form flickering like an old film. "Will you tell our stories too?" she asked, her voice echoing with decades of silence. Derrick, who had spent so long hiding his own pain behind a smile, found himself nodding. "Yes," he promised, his camera still recording despite its dying battery. "All of them." The spirits moved closer, each one carrying their own story of loss and longing. A boy who died waiting for parents who were too poor to visit regularly. A girl who fought cancer longer than her doctors thought possible, hoping to see her baby sister grow up. A teenager who passed away the day before his high school graduation, his diploma still unopened. Maya filmed everything, her documentary instincts warring with her grief as more spirits appeared. Through her lens, she caught something extraordinary, threads of light connecting each ghost to the others, creating a web of shared experience and understanding. "Look," she breathed, showing the others her viewfinder. "They're not just haunting this place. They're helping each other." Sam studied the phenomenon through his various instruments, his skepticism transforming into academic fascination. The energy patterns. They're not random. They're forming a kind of network, like a community. "That's what we all wanted, isn't it?" Jade asked, her voice uncharacteristically gentle. "Not to be alone anymore?" The realization hit them all differently. Maya thought of the support groups she'd avoided after Michael's death, convinced no one could understand her loss. Sam remembered how he pushed away friends who tried to help him cope with his father's illness. Derrick reflected on all the people he kept at arm's length, afraid they'd see through his act and reject the real him. And Jade. Jade finally understood that her carefully constructed solitude had been a prison of her own making. Tommy watched them with ancient eyes, seeing their understanding dawn. "Being alone doesn't make you safe," he said, echoing Jade's earlier words. "It just makes you lonely." The other spirits nodded in agreement, their forms growing brighter as if fed by the teens' growing awareness. The hospital itself seemed to respond, its oppressive atmosphere lifting slightly as decades of accumulated grief began to dissipate. "Maybe that's why we're really here," Maya suggested, lowering her camera to look at her friends, and she realized with surprise that they were friends now, bound together by this impossible night. Not just to find ghosts, but to find each other. To be shared with the world, too sacred to be reduced to clicks and likes. Instead, they carried the memory of Tommy and the other children with them, allowing it to shape them in ways they hadn't expected. For Maya, it was a reminder that grief could be a bridge, not just to wait. She started volunteering at a pediatric hospice, using her photography to capture the small, meaningful moments that families would treasure forever. Each photo she took felt like a quiet tribute to her brother, and to Tommy, who had helped her find peace. Derrick began to channel his energy into stories, using his platform not for cheap thrills, but to explore deeper truths. His followers noticed the change, commenting on how his videos had grown more introspective, more real. "Fear isn't just about ghosts," he once said in a video. "It's about facing what scares us most, and sometimes, that's ourselves." Sam dove headfirst into studying psychology, determined to understand the complexities of the mind, especially the parts that led people to see and hear what others couldn't. It wasn't just for his father, though he hoped to help him someday. It was for himself, too, to reconcile the part of him that had always sought logic with the part that now believed in things beyond explanation. And Jade, who had spent so much of her life pushing people away, found herself reaching out instead. She joined a local art collective, pouring her feelings into haunting, evocative paintings that drew people to her. In the process, she discovered that connection didn't make her weaker, it made her stronger. The four of them remained friends, bound together by the experience they shared at St. Havens. Whenever they met, they'd reminisce about that night, not with fear, but with gratitude for what it had taught them. And every time they visited Tommy's tree, they left feeling lighter, as if the boy who had waited so long to be remembered had, in turn, helped them remember how to live.